Hello, everybody, and welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. Project HR is brought to you every Thursday by Projections, an IRI company. IRI helps organizations navigate workplace challenges, improve employee engagement and productivity, manage labor relations, and implement effective communication strategies to achieve their goals. For more information, you can visit us online at projectionsinc.com and iriconsultants.com. I am Jennifer Oraquad, Director of Business Development for IRI, and your host for today's episode of Project HR. We can all agree that working from home allows more freedom in how we approach our workday. But while most of us see things like the lack of a commute or more flexible working hours as the primary benefit of working from home, according to a new study, a surprisingly large percentage of remote workers see on-the-job use of recreational drugs and alcohol as a key benefit of working from home. Today, we'll be changing up the Project HR format a bit to better understand this issue. First, I'll be speaking with Dr. Jasleen Chhatwal, Chief Medical Officer of Arizona-based Mental Health Treatment Center Sierra Tucson, who conducted the study I mentioned. She'll explain her team's findings and address how these developments could impact your organization. Later, I'll be speaking with Chris Kelly, CEO and President of Kelmar Safety, a company dedicated to helping businesses resolve tough challenges regarding compliance, security, employment screening, and more. And she'll give us some guidance on our best response to this kind of behavior. So first, I want to begin the conversation with Dr. Chhatwal. Thank you so much for joining me on Project HR, Jasleen.
Thank you so much for having me, Jennifer. I'm glad to be here.
So let's start with the study itself. It was titled Self-Medication Nation, the Numbing of America. And this was a survey. What prompted you and your team to conduct the survey?
Yeah, the survey came out of a couple different things that we were noticing in terms of trends. The first was that we were noticing skyrocketing rates of addiction. And this was not only in our patient population, but also in a lot of the surveys that were being conducted by other national organizations. And then there was additionally in our own patient population a trend where we were noticing that employee assistance programs or workplace HR staff were involved in patients coming to treatment or having support in coming to treatment. So, as we were looking at those trends, we thought to try and figure out why people were using, what was driving the use, and how they were continuing to go through life while using. And that's really where some of the questions and other process came about. We used a internationally known company called Ipsos for helping us to do this survey. And essentially, this is not a study where, we picked out patients or selected them and then went through assessing them. It was a survey that was done online where people essentially self-selected into answering that survey and its questions.
So you mentioned that people self-selected into the survey. So in your view, what are the primary takeaways from the survey?
Some of the most important findings, in my opinion, was that we were noticing that a lot of folks were struggling with loneliness, with stress, depression, anxiety. And then on top of that, it seemed like a lot of them, even during their work hours, were using substances like alcohol or marijuana to make themselves feel better in the moment. So I think that was an important piece. And in terms of numbers, it was about a fifth of people who said that they were using while they were at work. So either engaged in a virtual work meeting or some other type of activity. And then another thing we noticed was that out of the people who were using, there were about half who were saying they were using just for enjoyment, but there were about 20 to 30% who were also saying that they were using because of anxiety, because of stress, for loneliness, for depression. And because this was a multiple choice question, you could select multiple options. So it seemed like there could be somebody who was using for the sake of enjoyment, but then also for the sake of treating depression or enjoyment and anxiety, or anxiety and depression and stress. And that was the piece that was hard to parse out as to who reported what. But given that we had multiple overlapping responses, it was pretty clear that people were using for multiple reasons, one of which was self-medicating anxiety, self-medicating stress, self-medicating depression.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting because you said, fully 20% of our employees could be using at any given moment. That surprises me. Did any of the findings surprise you?
That was a shocking finding for me because as a physician, I cannot even fathom using at work
Hmm.
or using while doing anything work related.
Right.
And so I think, it made me think about, are there professions where that is okay? Or are these people who know that it may not be acceptable and are still using because there's such a lack of control that comes in?
All right, Jasleen, I'm going to take a quick sponsorship break right now, but when you and I return, I want to discuss what this might mean for today's workforce. Stay with us.
The relationships you have with your employees are critical to the success of your business. In today's ever-evolving political and economic climate, those relationships can also be the most vulnerable. Employee dissatisfaction can lead to union organizing activity, potentially disrupting operations, leading to costly lawsuits and negative publicity for your company. The IRI Labor Relations Consulting team brings with it a wide range of expertise, from former labor management executives to human resources professionals, and even award-winning communication experts. We'll help you create an environment where employees feel valued. Our goal is simple. We help your company thrive while creating a positive working environment. Get started today with a personalized labor relations readiness assessment from IRI. We'll provide you with a customized roadmap and the resources you need to succeed. Visit us at iriconsultants.com to learn more.
I'm back now with Dr. Jasleen Chhatwal, Chief Medical Officer of Sierra Tucson. Now, I feel like there are two stages here. First, the realization that this behavior is occurring at all on the clock, and then there's the understanding that it's actually getting worse, that as remote work becomes part of our new normal, this is increasing?
Given that it was a one time survey, I can't really speak to the fact whether this is increasing or not. We do know that for a lot of the folks who answered our survey, remote work was something that they were doing at this point. It wasn't something they'd always done. And as we know that there is an increased trend towards remote work and something that might continue for the near future. What was interesting to me in this data was that there has been an increasing trend in general around substance use.
Mm.
And so we know that people are using more than before, and that the pandemic definitely increased overall sales of alcohol and hence
Hmm.
use of alcohol, also increased use of marijuana. So in some ways, it is very likely that there can be increasing number of people who are using, especially if it's now become a behavior that they think is an okay coping mechanism to use.
And so, did the survey capture any demographic or psychographic information? Were you able to tell who might be more likely to use drugs or alcohol when working from home?
We do have demographic data, both in terms of age, gender, and then also the region of the country they were from.
Hmm.
And what we noticed was that across the board, the rates have gone up.
Hmm.
For young people, middle aged, older adults, male, female, and then the four major regions that it was divided in geographically. What we found was that across the board, everybody was using more. There was a slight uptick over and above the general population for older men and then younger women.
Hmm.
However, it wasn't really statistically significant to where I could say, oh, that's the population to watch for. I think it seems to be a pretty pan gender, pan age process at this point.
Hmm. And what happens when these employees return to work, as many of us are doing now, either permanently or in a hybrid work environment? Is that where you start to see people in your facility?
I would hope that we'd start to see people in our facility. But what we know as addiction professionals is that there are a lot of people who continue to engage in this behavior till the time that it actually starts to cause really major problems for themselves, either in their personal life or professional life. And that sometimes insight doesn't come from within, but comes from without by somebody else noticing that they're not
Mm.
doing as well.
Mhm.
And so the best case scenario would be if folks who were returning to work started to realize, hey, this is a problem. This is not something I could do at work, and self selected to come for treatment either to us or to a local therapist, local facility.
Mhm.
There are likely a lot of people who will just return to work while continuing to struggle with these issues. And I think that's where this conversation that we're having becomes really important, because what will workplaces do?
Mhm.
And also for myself as a manager, as a person who works in an organization with many other individuals, My own approach has been that, we need to start talking about this. We need to make it known that this is an ongoing problem and really start encouraging people more proactively to seek help and let them know that they're not alone.
Mhm. And for those that do need help, Sierra Tucson provides it. Can you tell us a little bit more about the work that you do there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sierra Tucson is a residential treatment center both for mental health and addiction disorders. And what we believe is that for most people, if they're not getting well from mental health issues or substance use conditions, it's because there's something in their developmental history or their life history that's keeping them stuck.
Hmm.
And so, what we do here is we do a very thorough assessment of their life circumstance, current conditions, what's going on, and help them identify some strengths and some areas to work on so as to help folks recover from both mental health conditions as well as addiction conditions. And as anybody who's in this field would know, it's very unusual to just have one or the other condition. Typically, they overlap. And so we notice that folks who have a lot of struggles with addiction can actually have some mental health conditions underlying, like I was sharing,
Hmm.
anxiety, depression, trauma. And so our work is to really help bring all of that to light and develop a treatment plan to help them recover fully and get back to their life.
That's amazing work that you do. I'm so pleased that you shared the survey with us, and I really want to thank you for talking with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. And I'm glad we're all talking about mental health finally.
Absolutely. And I want to let our audience know that a link to Sierra Tucson's website, as well as to the Self Medication Nation survey results, will be included in this episode's companion guide. So be sure to unlock that today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Now I want to turn to Chris Kelly, CEO and president at Kelmar Safety. Chris, in the previous segment, we explored the fact that many employees see workday drug and alcohol use as a benefit of remote work. And this is clearly concerning on a number of levels, and it's a situation employers need to understand and properly respond to. So I'm hoping to get a little guidance from you on that today. So thank you so much for joining me.
Great. Thank you for having me.
So let's talk about how on the job substance and alcohol use on the part of a remote employee can impact a company.
Well, first of all, your production obviously can be down. Absenteeism, even though they're at home, they can still call in absent, and also a turnover. And you'll lose that employee because obviously their attention and everything is elsewhere. So it can definitely affect a company's bottom line as well.
And most companies have policies against alcohol and drugs in the workplace. With remote workers, do those same policies restrict alcohol and drug use in the employee home during working hours?
Yes, it should, but I will caution you, you need to make sure how it's written. This is something that can definitely, cause a problem from a legal standpoint, and it just needs to be precise. And the rules shouldn't be different just because you work from home versus someone that's walking in the office every day. They're performing work at the direction of the company. It doesn't matter where you are. The trucking industry, for example, which I've been in the last 34 years, which actually controls the largest remote workforce in the world. And we've been doing so with drug and alcohol programs for those remote workers since 1995. So let me elaborate on that a little bit. When you think of a truck driver, for example, that truck is his office, but it's also his home or her home. And so what you run into, you're governing it there as well. So once again, you're still talking about production and absenteeism, turnover, and in that case, you could also have a crash, which makes it a little bit different than someone who might be working on a computer or things of that nature. But as far as that remote worker and their home versus workplace, it becomes one and the same. The consequences should be the same, and the help that you might provide for them needs to be the same too.
So, are there signs that employers should look for to assess if this is a problem in their company?
Yes, there are definitely things that you can watch out for. As I mentioned earlier, production is extremely important. Making sure that you can monitor those folks. Absenteeism. Another thing too, if you have a conference call and someone all of a sudden has slurred speech when they're on there, and you're
Hmm.
noticing some different behaviors and that sort of thing, call them at different times of the day and have those chats. Video appearance, well. you might not do so well with that. Somebody might not comb their hair real well or whatever. But the other thing too, you can test as well.
Chris, I need to take some time out for a quick break. We're going to be right back after this. You're listening to the weekly Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Orqua, and my guests today have been Dr. Jasleen Chhatwal, Chief Medical Officer of Sierra Tucson, and Chris Kelly, CEO and President at Kelmar Safety. We are back. So, Chris, in the last segment, we talked about the signs of on-the-job alcohol and drug use. Can you speak with us a little bit about the concept of reasonable suspicion as it relates to the situation?
Well, first of all, when you're dealing about reasonable suspicion, it's not just a matter of, I think someone's doing this, is that you need to observe this behavior. You need to get a test result. You need to have concrete things you can work with. So it's not just, hey, I think so and so is having a drug problem. Is with reasonable suspicion testing, using, like I mentioned, having people that can observe. And like I said, it needs to be contemporaneous. You need to also have documentation. You need to get that person tested. And then deal with those results with your HR policies and how that came about. So making sure that people have signed your policies, they know they're going to be tested, and they know that this type of test is available to be used is extremely important. Once again, I'm going to go kind of back to my trucking industry roots. We've used this very valuable tool for years. And it's very difficult when your driver hasn't been back to your terminal, for example, for 6 weeks. You haven't even seen this person. And now all of a sudden, you get a call or you get a comment, you hear something, and, that person isn't behaving right. And now you need to test them. But you need to use somebody that has a certification to do so. That way, you don't want this he said, she said thing. You need to actually have a formalized program to use this type of testing effectively.
So, if a leader does have reasonable suspicion that someone is drinking or taking drugs while on the clock, what should they do?
Well, first of all, we observe, we document, we get them in and test, we report those tests, and then we take action. We get that individual help if they do indeed test positive, according to our policies and what drugs that you're looking for, or in the case that maybe it's negative and they're really having a rough way to go, and this is maybe a different type of problem or medical problem, or you find out something about your employees, such as their spouse has left them, they're distraught, and there could be other things going on. So from an HR perspective, sometimes you can go down towards some different things you didn't quite expect at the time. So you have to be prepared to handle those.
So, can remote employees be tested for drugs or alcohol misuse while working?
Yes, but you need to have this spelled out in your policies. As I mentioned, we've been doing this in the trucking industry since 1995, and having those in place, what you're going to be tested for, because I'm sure we probably have listeners in states that allow medical marijuana and other states that do not. So you need to watch out for your local and state laws that might impact you. What are you actually testing for is really important along those lines. So not just the state, but have your randoms. We're going to pull like 50% of our workforce. You don't have to test 100%. Say 25 or 50% of our workforce, we're going to test every year or each quarter. Have the names in a randomized list. So that way someone's not picked on. Once again, random is not, hey, so-and-so, you're picked again for the fourth time in a row. This is random. Using someone such as a third-party administrator to do your random pulls and help you with your non-DOT program is just so important to help make sure that the program is done fairly and consistently, and you have a methodology about how you're going about it that people can expect, because you'll be tested if you step outside of those lines in the court system, because their job hangs on this. This is their livelihood and also their reputation.
And I know Kelmar focuses quite a bit on the trucking industry, and that's hence the reference to the DOT. What about in other industries? What other advice can we give for companies that operate, in manufacturing or in retail?
Oh, many of our clients are in manufacturing and retail as well. I just referred to the trucking industry because it is the most formalized. and
Hmm.
has the most policies and procedures in place that have been tested over time successfully. However, well, at Kelmar and many other third party administrators, we are working with all types of companies. We call it, you have a DOT, which would be the trucking side, and we also have non
Hmm.
DOT programs and setups. Um, you could test at a much lower percentage or higher percentage because there isn't a regulatory body such as the federal government telling you what you do or don't have to do. So when I go in and I work with a company and they are suspecting they're having a drug problem, well, I'm going to recommend it and I'm going to say, let's test at some higher rates until we can prove that everybody's doing better. Everybody's getting the picture that this is coming through and you can lose your job over this. And by
Hmm.
keeping it in random works out to be a great deterrent. So we are seeing this in retail. You have manufacturing. Many times we've seen, on the manufacturing line, anywhere that people are coming together. You don't see those so much in a remote workforce,
Hmm.
being able to do that. But it's just a very different flavor in the non DOT world because you can be a lot more creative instead of it being so strictly government regulated.
So, what can companies do to prevent abuse before it happens?
Educate, educate, educate. I can't say it enough. Really make sure you've got the word out there that this isn't something that, as an employee here, we want to have going on. Let them know. And even though, we say, yeah, we see it on the TV, everybody's trying to get the message out of what this can do and, what those effects are. And then also have really good policies in place that are clear and easy for somebody to understand, and that they know that their job could be on the line as well. And and when that's how you make your living, and you're a web designer and you love working at home, and how much you should value being able to do that, for a variety of reasons, and that it's not a free ride though. We still want you to
Hmm.
perform and behave when it comes to the drug abuse. We want you to have a healthy, happy life.
So, let's talk about your company, Kelmar Safety, and how you can help employers with worker substance use.
All right. Well, as I had mentioned earlier, we have an online program for certification for drug and alcohol abuse for managers and supervisors. That we have that for the trucking side, but we also have one that's for non-DOT. And I'll say for the rest of the world, so to speak,
Mhm.
that also brings about drug awareness and things that you can do. These are all online programs. And, we are a third party administrator. We can help someone set up that drug and alcohol program, pull those names, set up clinics, handle the results, and work with you when you have a positive and what's next. We actually have folks that can help you, implementing your policy and what makes sense for your company. Because there's no point in having some fancy policy that's got a bunch of stuff in it that looks great on paper if you're not willing to enforce it. So,
Mhm.
so kind of what I do with companies, I'll say, okay, your best salesperson just tested positive. Now what? Are you prepared to lose your top earner over this? Do you have
Mhm.
things in place that you can live with and things that, um, that
Mhm.
your company is or isn't going to tolerate? This isn't necessarily just about Schedule One, narcotics. This, and abuse. This can also just be illegal
Mhm.
drug use, and with the medical marijuana, as well as states that are allowing recreational marijuana. This has been our toughest and biggest hurdle to kind of overcome in some of these. You really don't want someone working on your items that's just not that top notch employee that if they
Mm.
worked in your office, they wouldn't be doing this.
Mm. Mhm. For sure. I want to let everybody know that a link to Kelmar's website will also be included in this episode's companion guide. So visit projectionsinc.com/podcast to access that today. Right now, though, Chris, it is time for our lightning round questions. And these are questions I like to ask of every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
I hope so. Go ahead.
All right. First question is always a topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about on the job substance use and reasonable suspicion. With that in mind, in your opinion, which of these suspicious Elvis Presley songs is better? 1962's Suspicion or 1969's Suspicious Minds?
Who is Elvis for 400, Alex? Oh, wait, Elvis has left the building.
So which song would you say is better?
Suspicion, I'm sorry.
All right, what's the best book that you've read recently?
Oh, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations. I live there.
All right, what's your favorite thing about the work that you do?
Teaching others.
Very good. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
No fear is usually followed by, oh no.
Very good. And finally, who or what inspires you?
Oh, learning something new. I can't wait to see what happens next.
Very good. Thanks so much for joining me today on this week's episode of Project HR, Chris.
Thank you. Once again, it's been great.
I also want to thank our listeners. This is your reminder to grab that companion guide for this episode at projectionsinc.com/podcast. If you'd like to be on Project HR or you know someone who would, please feel free to email us at projecthr@projectionsinc.com. And of course, a new Project HR episode drops every Thursday. Be sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. Drop us a line, leave us a review, or give us a handful of stars wherever you get your content. That's it for me for now. Let's make it a great day at work.